If you hear the word scales and the first thing you think about is them shiny little things on the outside of a fish, you've got a problem. But if the second thing that you think of is a dusty old scale pattern that you learned from your buddy Mel Bay, that might be even worse. Follow the advice I'm going to lay out for you guys in this video, and before long you're going to be so covered in scales your friends are going to start calling you Aquaman. I'm Uncle Ben, and this is why you suck at guitar. Well, howdy there kids, it's your good buddy Uncle Ben, and welcome to a brand new installment of This Is Why You Suck at Guitar. You know guys, when it comes time to getting edumacated and learning our scales and modes, I think there's just way too much emphasis placed on learning all kinds of different shapes. I've seen this time and time again where a young shred-eye knight might memorize every scale pattern that there is in the guitar grimoire, but still have a hard time connecting the dots and making it all fit together. Just like me on my homeschool prom night. But I guarantee that if you learn every scale 4 different ways, like I'm going to show you in this video, that neck's going to get smothered and covered. Just the way your mother likes it. At Waffle House. Behind the dumpster. After she gets off work. Tell her I said hi. As always, this video is brought to you guys by everybody who supports my channel over on the greatest site the entire internet has to offer. My Patreon page at patreon.com/BenEllerGuitars. Sign up today, you're going to get access to all kinds of goodies like bonus videos, backing tracks, downloadable tabs, and so much more. This week, everybody who supports my channel, even for just $1 a month, is going to get access to some special assets to go along with this video, like some of my scale tabs, charts, etc. So, don't delay. Sign up today. Gear-wise for today's video, I'll be playing my lovely Jackson Virtuoso, because you are what you play, right? I'm playing that through my Marshall 1987X Plexi into the Universal Audio aux. But now kids, it's time to turn you into the next Eddie Van Scalen. Alright, now first things first, for all the examples in today's video, I'm going to be using the B Phrygian scale. That's to ensure that all the metal guys like myself out there don't immediately turn this video off because I started talking about the major scale, aka the sissy one. I'm doing that for you guys because let's be honest, you all need this help more than anybody. It hurts to hear that, but I only say it because I care. But seriously, for the love of God and all that's holy, learn the f***ing major scale. It's the basis of absolutely everything, even the evil exotic scales that we all like to use. I've got an entire video about it. Thumbnail looks like that. I'll put a link to it down there in the video description. The first way that you're going to want to learn every scale is with standard form, which is kind of like the missionary position of scale patterns. It's just like I used to hear my pastor Frank say all the time. This position is perfect for beginners because it doesn't require any big stretches. Standard form scale patterns are usually pretty boxy and don't cover much more than 3 or 4 frets like we see right here. So even if you've got modestly sized mitts, these things are going to fit in the palm of your hand like a thing that goes there. Because standard form scale patterns are so boxy, they're usually pretty easy to visualize and memorize on the fretboard, and they typically start and end on a root note, so you get to hear the entire thing kind of go full circle a few times around. Using these scale patterns, it's also usually pretty easy to see how the arpeggios that it generates fit inside of it. You can do that just by starting off on the root, then playing a little game of hopscotch where you skip a note and play, skip a note and play, and then go to the next root note, skip a note and play, skip a note and play, and then go to the next root note. That's going to leave you with a pattern that looks like this. The young sophisticates among you might recognize that as a B minor arpeggio. But there are some drawbacks. Standard form scale patterns typically feature a mixed bag of notes per string. It's usually either 3, 2, or sometimes even just 1. That irregular grouping of notes means that doing heroic sequence shred licks like our friend Paul Gilbert ends up being harder than my homeschool algebra class. Typical sequences like playing up the scale in 6s, can can become more treacherous to navigate than one of Pastor Frank's one-on-one sessions in the broom closet. Also, they typically feature a pretty narrow range and just stay in one position of the fretboard. That's when you need to learn 3-note per string scales. This is kind of like the doggy style position of scale patterns. It's where all the hot stuff happens. Yes, they're long, they're strong, they're down to get the friction on, and they immediately solve most of the problems that we were just talking about with standard form scales. As the name implies, 3-note per string scale patterns all feature the same number of notes per string. 3, namely. And a lot of our favorite players, like Paul Gilbert, Joe Satriani, and Francis Bubble Trousers, use these scale patterns because it's really easy to simply copy and paste ideas from string to string. So for example, the shreddy lick I played just a second ago was based around 6s, where I just played up a string twice, then I went to the next string and did the same thing. That means for every string, this is kind of a copy and paste scenario, where the picking and even the finger placement string by string is all pretty much the same thing. And if you're using a 6-string 3-note per string scale pattern, you're also going to pass by that root note 3 different times and continue on for almost another half of an octave. I want to put out a little sidebar right here too and say that 3-note per string patterns are really only handy for your standard scales and modes. Your pentatonic, hexatonic, and blues scales, those get pretty nasty to traverse if you're using 3-note per string, so don't really worry about it if you're using them blues scales. Having 3 notes available on every string also gives you access to those cool legato patterns used by players like Alvin Hogwarts. But the downside of 3-note per string scale patterns is the same problem that you have if you have a 15-inch dong. Sometimes they're just too big and cumbersome to whip out at a moment's notice. I'm not speaking from experience on that one. Especially if you're playing over a tune that features some unusual chord or key changes, using a 3-note per string scale pattern can sometimes feel like you're fighting with a broadsword in an elevator. The chords are just way too close and you can't even unsheathe the thing, much less do battle with it. And just like the butter churner position, some players might find these stretches to be too challenging. Also find that just due to the sheer scope of the things, a lot of players that learn 3-note per string scales never really learn the construction of the scale itself. That's really going to limit you in the long run and make you play up and down boxes exclusively. If that sounds like you, then it's probably time to start learning 1-string scale patterns. I kind of think about these as being like a sexy dance or like the helicopter move, you know? It's not something that you're going to stay in, but it does help to tie other positions together. One-string scale shapes are excellent because you can whip them out at a moment's notice. Just like Pastor Frank used to. As long as you know where to find the root note for any particular scale you're using, you can attach one of these 1-string shapes and shred up and down it. Whenever we do this, all that we're doing is taking the notes of a scale and arranging them laterally instead of vertically. The really excellent thing about learning scales this way is because you can clearly see the step pattern or interval pattern used inside of any scale. It's really going to help you learn and understand it way more better than just learning a shape. So for example, if you learn that Phrygian scale as a vertical scale pattern like we've been talking about so far, it can be really hard to break away from that because it doesn't really tell you much about the anatomy of a scale, how it's put together. But if you take that exact same thing and play it laterally, you'll clearly see how it goes. It starts off on a root note, goes a half step up to that flat second, a step up to the flat third, step up to the 4, step up to the 5, half step to flat 6, whole step to flat 7, and a whole step again, we're back at root. If you know a shape, that's all you'll ever be able to do is play up and down that thing. But when you know the construction of a scale, you can go totally off range, create your own scale patterns, and not be limited to playing up and down shapes. One of my favorite things to do with these lateral scale shapes is to combine them with the more vertical patterns. So for example, take any of the patterns that you've learned so far for a scale and stop whenever you reach a root note. So So for example, there's my root note of that B Phrygian scale right there, right? Now from here, if I understand the lateral form, I can go on a little detour and take that thing vertically just by remembering the step or interval pattern. And the cool thing is once you reach that root again, you're back at familiar turf. You're just at an octave above where you began. So you can play up and down that scale pattern from there. And you can also use one-string scale patterns all over the place in your soloing. You can tremolo pick your way up like Eddie Van Scalen. If you sequence it in groups of 3s or 4s, you start sounding like our good friend Yin Yang Milkshake. You could go Satch style and get all slippy slidey on it. Or get all tippity tappity if you're a bisexual like myself. Learning those bad Larrys can get you moving around the fretboard faster than a cheetah on a speedboat. But you're going to be able to do that a lot more better if you learn. Pocket octave scale patterns, the final frontier. I kind of think of these as being like let's say the quickie of the scale pattern world. It's hopefully not something you're going to base like your entire style off of, but every now and then, it's kind of nice. I love these things and I use them all the time, especially in more jazz or fusion kind of context where there's like a lot of key changes whizzing by. The awesome thing about these is it's kind of like the opposite of the broadsword and an elevator problem we talked about with the 3-note per string scale shapes. These things are like a flick knife. You could be like a common 1950s street tough and just whipping these things out anywhere. Let's go back to where we started with the standard form scale pattern for this B Phrygian scale. Now that is 1 octave worth. That takes us from root to root again. Memorize that shape. Now find another B note on the neck, like let's say for example the A string fret number 2. Don't even worry about the notes, the intervals, whatever. Just think of that exact same shape that you memorized a moment ago, only put it right there instead. Now we have a little Phrygian pocket in an entirely different area of the neck. But there is a catch, and it's that dumb son of a bitch, the B string. Here's what I mean. Put that same shape only from this B note, the 9th fret D string. Now if we play that scale shape just as we learned it, it's going to sound like this. Ah, the dreaded accidental Holdsworth sound. Not exactly something that we're going for all the time. You have to learn how to navigate the B string, but that's just part of the guitar playing experience, and it's only going to build character and knowledge that you can apply to other areas of your guitar learning experience. Here's what I mean. The B string is perpetually tuned down a half step. You know, if you learned how to tune a guitar like this, you'll notice how the B string was a note lower than everybody else. That means that anytime a scale shape that we know is crossing over the B string, that shape has to be corrected, as Grady said in The Shining, only a little less violent than that. Here's what I mean. Think about that pattern that we learned a second ago. Do you see how the back wall of that shape was a straight line? The lowest note on every string was on the same fret under our first finger. Whenever one of these shapes is crossing over the B string, it must be corrected to account for that tuned down a half step kind of nature of that string. So whenever we start the shape off on the D string, it's not going to have that same straight back wall like the other ones did. We have to fix that shape by moving it up a half step. Again, think of it as the B string is a half step flat, so you got to move everything up a half step sharp. So now the back wall is going to come up, and we complete our shape. This is cool because this means I could take a 1 octave scale shape from this B note and connect it to a 1 octave scale shape from this B note. I could even go from that B note right there and have a kind of incomplete scale shape. I could continue like that if I know the one string shape and can visualize that from wherever I am in the scale. Well, let's think about if we were doing that down here. There's a new B note right there, right? Now again, if I put my first finger there and I play the scale shape as I learned it, it's gonna be 10 kinds of f***ed off. That almost sounds like intentional Holdsworth. Anyway, what you gotta do with that one right there is you got to correct the B string. So we're going to come up, break that straight back wall, but you only gotta fix it once. After that, everything is fine. You don't have to like move back down for the high E or move up again or anything like that. After you cross over the B string, all the corrections are done. So everything is business as usual. So I could go. What do you know, a root note? This one I could go to standard form. I could maybe transition into my 3-note per string. Or even go to a 1-string territory. The possibilities are really endless, and one of my favorite things about pocket octave shapes is it gets you searching for root notes on places other than the big string on the bottom. So many guitar players are guilty of only thinking about the root notes as occurring on the low E string. It's the first note that they learned in the scale pattern, so it's therefore the most important one. Totally not true. The best players out there can find a root note wherever it is. You can start using the golf methodology of playing the ball where it lies if you master pocket octaves. These shapes are especially handy for you players that like to drop the D. But be careful. It's exactly how my Pastor Frank landed himself behind bars. So there you go, guys. I gave you the keys to the Ferrari as well as a trip down core memory lane in my time in youth group. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that and can use it to learn every scale that there is to know in the book and start writing some hot licks today. If you like this video and want to snag all the resources that go along with it, be sure to check out my Patreon page today over at patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. Just $1 a month. It's going to get you access to a ton of bonus videos, backing tracks, downloadable tabs, and so much more. So don't delay. Sign up today. And be sure to let me know in the comments section what you suck at when it comes to guitar, and we'll cover that on a future installment of this series. Thanks so much for liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Be sure to ring the bell down there for notifications every time I upload a new slice of fried gold. Now get away from the dang old computer machine and start learning some scales more better. Less clicking, more picking.